Minister, tēnā koe, thank you very much for your time.
Good to be here.
Really appreciate it. Gee, you wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
What are you looking for in terms of the way that you engage with Māori on things like housing and infrastructure, transport and RMA? They're big issues.
Yeah, I mean, and they're all different, right? But I mean, the most fundamental point is just engagement. When it comes to RM reform, for example, Māori are a critical part of the resource management system right now, and so working with Pāho, who are the sort of iwi leaders to do with resource management reforms, talking to them around the future role of Māoridom within the resource management system. It's really important, both from an Article 2 treaty point of view, but also the existing rights through treaty settlements that are reflected in the RMA now. There's quite a close interaction between settlements that the Crown has entered into in good faith, many of which actually refer to specific sections of the resource management system. So as we transition into a new planning regime, the Resource Management Act's being done away with, but there'll be two new acts, an Environment Act and a Planning Act. As we transition to that new regime, it's really important that the Crown upholds the settlements entered into in good faith. Now, there's a degree of complexity around how we do that.
So how do you deal with that complexity? Because there's some concern, right? Particularly at the grassroots level. Hapu who have to deal with councils.
Yes.
And who may feel like, when it comes to things like treaty principles, or actually no, kaitiakitanga, which is a big thing, guardianship over waterways and things like that. So how do you deal with complexities, not just at that national iwi leaders level, but also at hapu levels where they say they have rights and obligations under te tiriti?
Yes, so there's a couple of things going on. The first is it's absolutely paramount for this government that we protect settlements that have been entered into in good faith. They need to be durable and long-lasting, and when the Crown signed them and when iwi signed them as well, they're full and final, and they reflect a range of rights and obligations that both sides have entered into in good faith. So we've got to port those settlements into the new planning regime, and they vary in terms of obligations from the Crown and the role of PSGEs in the system. So there's a degree of complexity around exactly what those arrangements are, and some are more bespoke than others. So you take Waikato, for example, the arrangements around the Waikato River, they are
co-management
and they are and quite heavy involvement in the planning regime around the Waikato River. That's an order of magnitude different to some other settlements, which are more statutory acknowledgements, more sort of lower level involvement in plans and things like that. So we're just working our way through that. I'm really confident there's a pathway through. It's not a problem that we can't solve. Where there's a will, there's a way. Then there's the broader issue, which I think you're touching upon as well, which is more Article 2 and the existing provisions in the RMA, Section 6E, which refers to ancestral lands and refers to taonga and protecting those rights as well. And we're just working our way through that in good faith with iwi, but also not just iwi as well, because there's Māori land trusts and a whole variety of different entities out there that have interests in the system as well. So we don't have a final decision, but there will be a role to reflect and protect Article 2 treaty rights in the new system. And actually, the protection of ancestral land, for example, predates the RMA. In fact, it predates the Town and Country Planning Act 1977. So it goes all the way back to many variations of our planning law in the past. And so protecting those rights are really important, and we will do that. How we do that is Cabinet has yet to make a decision on. And of course, customary rights is its own other thing entirely. Partly reflected in resource management law.
Yes. Still has a place?
Well, customary rights predate the treaty.
For communities, right?
Customary title and customary rights predate the treaty.
Yeah.
People often forget this. They are a part of the common law, and the reason why, when my ancestors turned up here, on my mum's side of the family, I'm descended from people who turned up here on the first ships into Petone, into Pitoone Harbour, where I grew up, or near where I grew up, in 1842, 1844. Customary law predates English settlement into New Zealand, and the Court of Appeal and Supreme Court has found that on a number of occasions. So customary rights and customary title are important.
I want to talk a bit about housing.
Yeah.
And in particular the change, the movement of money from papakāinga whaioranga into the flexible fund.
Yes.
Why do that?
So what we're trying to do with the housing system is move away from bespoke funds towards a much more flexible system that empowers communities and people delivering housing in communities. And so the way it works at the moment is government's got an affordable housing fund, they've got a progressive home ownership fund, they've got whakae whananga. There's about 20 different programs if you look through the appropriations. And what happens at the moment is people come up with a bright idea and then they go and find a fund to fit within. And if the money's run out, they have to go and change their program to find another particular initiative. What we're trying to do is create a housing system which is much more flexible about what it can invest in, and my 3 principles are the following: right house, right place, right people. Our system does not build the right houses in the right place for the right people at the moment. Right house, for example, 60% of people on the social housing register need a 1-bedroom unit. Kāinga Ora has 12% of its stock are 1-bedrooms. We haven't been procuring and buying 1-bedroom units. We haven't been building in the right places. We know where the housing need is. It's right around the country, but there are particular pockets of need where we haven't done a very good job of calibrating what the government does and where we build, and then right people as well. Within that system, one of the things that has been happening over the last 5 years is very positive developments around
Toitū Tairāwhiti.
Toitū Tairāwhiti, where we just made an announcement the other day of 50 million bucks or so for around 150 rentals. Yeah. And that's precisely the sort of thing that the system can now do, because what we're going to do is transition the system to say, we want to build the right houses in the right places for the right people, and that will involve partnering with the community housing sector. Will also involve partnering with iwi in some circumstances, community housing providers that are Māori backed, or it may involve other Māori entities that have land, because critically often what they can do is bring to the table is land, and then the Crown comes in over the top, or central government comes in over the top with a bit of capital funding or a bit of operating funding, whatever it takes to make it work. Very affordable development of land, which is in everyone's interest. So the system will become much more flexible. We will publish an investment strategy in which we say, here's what we want to build, here's how we want to build it, and basically it'll be a contestable process, and within that there'll be a role for, as I say, for a range of Māori providers.
Because when people see the loss of what, I don't know the best way to put it, discrete funding, right, yes, going into a flexible fund, it looks like a mainstreaming approach, yes, to try and get an outcome that's already being delivered upon, like the likes of Toitū Tairāwhiti and others that we mentioned. Right?
I understand.
What's your response to that?
Oh, well, I understand that, and I can understand why people will be potentially a little bit anxious about it. The point I would say is we are really keen to partner with groups like Toitū Tairāwhiti. There's the development of Tainui around Hamilton, which we funded earlier in the year as well, and Tamapotaka is in charge of this area and has a range of relationships, as does central government as well. And so there is a range of different things we can do, and groups like those will be part of the solution, because for me it's about value for money, partnering with regions that need housing and focusing on the right people, and it just so happens that those are often Māori communities in need, who need affordable rentals, they need sometimes social housing, they also need the wraparound support that the Crown, the central government's quite bad at providing, frankly. So there's going to be a role for some of these groups that you're talking about.
So papakāinga developments and things like that are still very much on the table as well.
Well, actually, papakāinga, we are publishing a national environmental standard for papakāinga. Now, what that means in practice is that every council around the country will be required to have rules that enable papakāinga housing. So some councils are really good at it at the moment. Other councils have nothing in their district plans around papakāinga, or they might have something, but it's basically not really well developed. We will be publishing through the existing RMA, but it will transition into the new one, a national environmental standard for papakāinga, in the same way that we're doing the same thing for granny flats. And so that will set consistent national rules around papakāinga, and it will require every council to enable papakāinga in their particular relevant district that they're talking about. Okay. It's a big step forward. It doesn't exist right now. We spent the last year developing that.
Okay, and that's been done in consultation directly with Māori, not just iwi leaders, but also local community development groups. Māori,
Ministry of the Environment and Te Puna Kokore have been leading that, and Tama's been involved in it, Tamapotaka. Okay. But it's actually in my RM portfolio in housing.
Okay, can I ask a question about rangatahi homelessness? So we've talked to advocates who have some real concerns. In fact, if you talk to Pāperinga Mahera Maihi, she says that a number of people that she has dealt with, they have applied for housing, emergency housing, 100% of them have failed, and that's mainly because there's been a focus on families and not on youth. You talk to other advocates who say that there are people as young as 11, 12 and 13 who have no housing at the moment, and because of the result of the budget decision taken last year for the $20 million for rangatahi transitional housing, it has had an impact now.
Yep.
What is your response to what they're saying?
I mean, the first thing I would say is homelessness is a tragedy, and part of my driving force of being in politics is to get homeless. No one wants a world in which homelessness exists. Is do as much as we can to eliminate the housing register and eliminate homelessness. I'm trying to build a housing system That means more affordable rentals, that means greater home ownership rates, but also means that people who need a warm, dry home can live in dignity. It's the most fundamental thing that the government can do to help everyone in society. In terms of emergency housing, you've got to think about where we came from and where we've got to. So we came into government, there were over 3,000 families living in emergency housing motels. Many had been there for a very long time. One of the first things we did in government was set up a thing called Priority 1, which said if you're in emergency housing and you've got kids and you've been there for 12 weeks or longer, you go to the top of the wait list to get out. Now we have just over 500 families in emergency housing. They were costing the government $30 million a month. The last government spent $1.5 billion on emergency housing motels. We've now got that number down, but most importantly, we've got people into warm, dry homes. Those people are going into social housing, some cases private rentals, some cases transitional housing. In terms of emergency housing, the access to it, it will always be there for people who need it. So the rules are really clear. If you are in severe and urgent need of housing and you turn up to MSD, the support is available to those who need it. I'm fully aware of the issues around youth homelessness, and there are a complex series of problems there. The government is not particularly good at the interventions and the support required to help people in need. We've got a work program underway to make sure that the funding that is in the system now, of which there's hundreds of millions of dollars, by the way, is much more calibrated and tailored to those in need. No one wants to see a world in which there is youth homelessness in particular, and we've got to get the system geared up to deal with it better.
So what do these youth that are not being housed at the moment and who are coming to the end of the cycle of the emergency housing arrangements that they have currently, so
Yes.
for example at Papakāinga, they're coming to the end of their 1 year, right?
Yes.
Where do they go? What do they do? Because at the moment the only option they've got now is back on the streets, not so.
Well, I don't want to see a situation in which that happens. There will be a range of support available for them, as there should be. Emergency housing is there as a last resort.
Yep.
There's also transitional housing, and there's
Yep.
a range of providers working across the homelessness intervention space, which is a very bureaucratic phrase, but it's the best way to describe
Yep.
very challenging circumstances. We fund a lot of that. Well, there's always more we can do, and there's always more we can do to get the system better calibrated and better geared up for people in need.
Yep.
But the most fundamental thing we can do is fix the housing system so that rents are more affordable, that home ownership is a greater possibility, and that we have more providers accessing the support that people need.
Okay, I want to talk about infrastructure.
Yeah.
You'll be aware, iwi are really keen to get involved in infrastructure. They weren't initially involved actually in the infrastructure symposium, which I guess is a question, but at the end of the day there have been some arrangements and relationships formed. How do you see your role in that space? Do you see your role as I know minister, but as an advocate or a facilitator or a relationship builder between international investors involved in infrastructure with iwi?
I mean, both, to be honest. I mean, one of the things about the infrastructure summit that we had earlier in the year in March was the involvement of iwi leaders, and I was a bit surprised someone said that they weren't initially invited. I suspect that might be true at one
point.
Well, at the very start, but what happened is we broadened the scope of the whole thing actually. So it was initially going to be about essentially the public infrastructure pipeline. Then we said, quite early on actually, we said, hang on a minute, this is about investment more generally into New Zealand, and so we don't just want it to be about the public sector partnering with private capital. We want to focus on things like aquaculture, things like energy and things like that. And we broaden it out. So anyway, but that's kind of by the by. But there's huge interest from overseas, and it's part of the unique New Zealand experience and part of investing in New Zealand to partner with iwi, because what they do is bring capital to the table, and so there is any number of opportunities, or will be over the forthcoming years, for iwi capital to partner with private capital around the deployment of infrastructure in New Zealand, both private infrastructure but also public sector infrastructure as well.
So we're talking iwi across the board, where they are wanting to play in this space, there is an opportunity to do that, and you've got an open door in terms of wanting to have those talks and negotiations.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's a contestable process. So, take the Northland Expressway public-private partnership, for example. There's a range of consortia that are forming around that from a construction and a funding and financing point of view, and I suspect many of them will be reaching out to iwi in New Zealand in order to have them crowd in some money, and that'd be a good thing for New Zealand.
There seems to be a lot of focus on roads too, right? I mean, the phrase that I heard was the roads are the new pine trees in New Zealand. And
we do want to build a few, but there's other opportunities. I mean, energy is a classic, right?
Okay.
I mean, you take geothermal energy, where a range of iwi have interest now already. I mean, there's huge potential there.
Yep.
we have an infrastructure deficit. It's not like there's a lack of stuff to build.
Yeah. Well, what happens, though, for example, where there is a requirement for funding sources to be confirmed, and then we don't have enough money to be big players in it, does that shut the door on that?
No, it doesn't. I mean, it depends on the project, depends on the investments, and depends on the investors you're talking about. But I think if you just go up a level, many of them have money. They have an active interest in deploying that capital in a way that gets a return for them and grows their pie, so to speak. And it's the same with people investing from offshore. So there's any number of opportunities I'm really excited about. I mean, it's one of the most amazing success stories in New Zealand post-1995, right, through the first settlement. The most amazing story of entrepreneurship and success for New Zealand. When you think about what Ngāi Tahu's been able to do, Waikato with the Brookfield investment, that's a $1 billion investment with Tainui into the development of essentially an inland port, a transport and logistics hub, providing jobs and growth for not only the Waikato but also Tainui youngsters. It's an incredible story. How could anyone be opposed to that? I just look at it and go, that's New Zealand's future. That's incredible.
So we've spoken to a couple of people in the infrastructure industry who say in the phase of building the pipeline, there's a timeline issue. Are you concerned that in trying to build the pipeline that it's going to take too much time to be able to get the sod turned so that a lot of these infrastructure industry companies can actually start working and survive in the meantime because there aren't a lot of projects going now?
Yeah, I sometimes get told that there's quite a bit happening right now. So there's, from memory, $206 billion in the forward pipeline published by the Infrastructure Commission, National Infrastructure pipeline. There's hundreds of billions of dollars that has a funding source confirmed that is likely to be built in the next 5 to 10 years. There's billions in delivery right now. The budget just allocated an extra $4 billion through the capital pipeline for a range of projects from hospitals, schools. Think about my own electorate, Melling's getting underway later in the year. We've got Brougham Street down in Christchurch. We've got the Northland Expressway. That will start construction next year. The previous government wasn't interested in doing a lot of projects, or if they were going to start in kind of 2030. Like they put all their eggs in the light rail basket. That wasn't going to start till 2030. A lot of the pre-work that normally gets done around consenting and business cases and all that sort of stuff just wasn't done. So we turned up in late 2023. There's only one major road that's actually consented and ready to go. That's Warkworth to Wellsford, which was part of the Northern Expressway, which we're going to get on with. But there's an enormous amount of work having to be done to build the pipeline up.
Okay. I just want to go to an interesting line I heard from David Seymour. It was after the announcement of the budget. His view on funding directly into Māori initiatives is essentially, he called them racist. Do you support that view?
Well, no. I mean, I don't. I mean, I think you've got to unpick that a little bit. I mean, the reality is Māori providers, whether it's housing or social services or health, for example, or whānau ora providers, for example, do an enormous amount of work on the ground. And it's in everyone's interests that Māori do better, both in education. I mean, kura kaupapa is essentially a Māori, it's by Māori for Māori. The government funds that because we recognise that school choice is important. We have a range of health providers who are able to go to areas and reach people that traditional mainstream providers simply can't reach. I mean, I used to be the COVID-19 spokesperson, right? I mean, I was a strong advocate during that process. Remember when we did all the vaccine rollout and how slow it was? And
Māori community organisations.
100%. They were particular. Māori in particular was lower than everybody else. And of course, the thing about vaccination is you need as many people as possible. So when there are particular groups that are falling below the averages.
It's the inequity, right?
It's the inequity.
Trying to address the equity.
But the point is the inequity for Māori in relation to the vaccine rollout affected everybody else because that's the whole point of vaccination. You need as many people as possible. So it's in everyone's interest to find providers that reach the most number of people in the most effective way.
Exactly. And so if we're talking about inequity and we're trying to address that in health, housing and education, and the way to deal with that is to directly fund so that we start to see equitable outcomes, isn't what the Minister and the coalition government is saying, is this completely off base, isn't it, Minister?
It's not how I'd put it. It's not how I'd put it. And it's not the government's approach. We do what works and we find the best provider for the groups we're trying to reach.
Minister, really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.